Okay, let's dive into this. Um, think about an artist who's not just doing their own thing, but is like a magnet. Yeah, pulling other artists into these wild collaborations.
Yeah, exactly.
We're zeroing in on Bob Camblin, Houston, 1986. It was quite a year for him, exhibitions, these partnerships, and all layered with this really interesting personal philosophy.
It really is remarkable the amount of material we actually have. We've got, catalogs from his exhibitions. There's a book that places him in the context of Texas landscape art.
Right.
And maybe the coolest part, this collection of his own quotes, they're often pretty poetic, uh, definitely thought-provoking.
Definitely. So, our mission today for this deep dive is to unpack all that. We want to understand what was driving Bob Camlin back then in 86 Houston, get a feel for that collaborative energy he had, and, the core idea shaping his art, his life.
Yeah, trying to piece together that moment.
Think of it like uncovering this really vibrant key moment for a pretty unique artist.
And you see it right away. 1986 was incredibly busy for him. He was in 4 different shows, 4, including one overseas in Paris.
Paris. Wow, okay. That's significant.
Yeah, Gallery Dario Pocara. The show was called Sync Houston, Texas.
And who else was in that show with him? Other Houston artists?
Yep. Lucas Johnson, Gail Stack, Burt Long, and Ron Hoover. Camblin showed works on paper, gouache, and ink. Pieces called Cunidado, Just Leave,
Yeah.
and Venus.
Hmm.
And apparently that trip, being in Paris, it stuck with him. It sparked a later piece he actually titled French Window.
Oh, interesting. Like the city itself became part of the art later on.
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe the atmosphere, the different energy.
Oh.
Who knows?
But he was still very much connected to the Texas scene, right? I mean, he was in the Texas landscape 1986 back in Houston.
Oh, absolutely. At the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston.
Yeah.
That exhibition put his work alongside, a whole history of artists looking at the Texas landscape.
What pieces did he show there?
4 casing works on paper. Year of the Buffalo, First Sighting, USA, and Sincerely Anonymous.
Sincerely Anonymous. Again,
Yeah.
we'll come back to that, I bet.
Definitely a recurring theme. And, critics notice his work in that show. Mel McCombie, writing for The Nation, described Camblin's stuff as these: tangled views of water and lush vegetation around the Gulf.
Tangled views. I like that. It's just something complex, not just a straightforward picture.
Exactly. Not just pretty scenery. And his inclusion was cemented, too, because he was featured in Susie Khalil's book that accompanied the exhibition. Same title, The Texas Landscape.
So he's getting recognition both locally in this historical context and internationally in Paris. Busy year.
Very busy. But I think where you really see Camblin's unique signature approach is in another show that year, Collaborators. Artists working together in Houston, 1969-1986.
Ah, the collaboration aspect. That seems key.
Yeah, it was held at the Glassell School of Art, and it really shone a light on that side of his practice.
And Janet Landay, in the catalog, called him Houston's art collaborator par excellence. That's quite a statement.
It is. She had this great analogy comparing the collaborators to band members. Sometimes they riff solo, sometimes they play together.
Right.
But they needed like a shared starting point, a preliminary subject or theme to kind of jam around.
Makes sense. So who is he collaborating with? The list seems long.
It's pretty credible, yeah.
Yeah.
The exhibition show works with a ton of different artists. It's like a who's who is a certain part of the Houston scene then.
Okay, give me some names.
All right. Collaborations with Earl Staley. They worked together as B&E. Then Joe Tate got involved, making a B&J.
B&E, B-E-and-J, like band name.
Totally. And then that evolved into a collective called the Holding Firm.
Yeah, holding firm, okay.
Then there were projects with David McManaway, Robert Heinches, David Folkmans, Jack Boynton, William Wiley, Richard Cabral, Robert Hudson, Sharon Boynton, Ellen O. Smith, Ron Arena, Nancy Giordano, Don Redman, even one listed just as Gary and Don.
Wow. He really got around, artistically speaking.
He really did.
Yeah.
And then, of course, those works signed anonymous artists.
Right, the anonymous thing again. So were these just like one-off projects, or did these groups have some history?
No, they definitely had history. Like I said, B&E was Staley, then adding Tate for B&J, which turned into the Holding Firm.
Oh.
And we get these little glimpses into how they worked.
Oh, so.
Well, Susan Chadwick wrote about it in the Houston Post. She talked about the good old days and how the Holding Firm would go on these camping trips out to Flatonia.
Camping trips for art.
Yeah. And apparently they would literally just draw or paint right on top of each other's work. Just pass it around, add to it.
Seriously?
Yeah. And then sign the finished pieces, anonymous artists, blurring those lines of who did what.
That's fascinating. It really pushes back against the idea of the solitary genius artist, doesn't it?
Completely. And you remember that mention of a fur-covered suitcase?
With the weird stick rabbit inside, yeah.
That came out of the holding firm. It kind of perfectly captures that playful, experimental, maybe slightly surreal vibe they had going on. It's like
Yeah.
art is a game almost.
A very creative, slightly bizarre game. I
Yep.
like it.
And Patricia Johnson, writing for the Houston Chronicle, she picked up on some specifics too. She talked about a piece called Jomo Collaboration with David McManaway.
Okay.
She said it really successfully combined Camblin's drawing skills with McManaway's assemblage work, like putting objects together.
So different techniques merging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Johnson even compared it to the surrealist game Exquisite Corpse.
Oh, right. Where you draw part of a body, fold the paper, the next person draws the next part without seeing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That element of chance and unexpected combinations. She also mentioned another piece, an untitled collage from '77 with lots of artists involved, where even though the parts were made separately, they somehow came together as a unified whole.
It sounds like a constant conversation, but happening visually.
That's a great way to put it. And the fact that Collaborators show even included videotapes by the holding firm. It suggests the process, the interaction itself, was part of the art.
Not just the final object.
Right. But beyond these big shows, Camblin was also, nurturing the local scene. There was this event at his studio, 1401 W. Gray,
Okay.
in July '86. It was celebrating his first year in that space, which used to be Little Egypt Enterprises, apparently.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And it was a gathering for friends, family, but specifically noted as being in appreciation of the Cultural Arts Council of Houston.
Ah, so he's connecting with the city's arts, funding, and support structures, too. Engaged on all levels.
Seems like it. And his reach wasn't just limited to Houston, even within Texas. He was also featured in Annette Carlozzi's book, 50 Texas Artists.
Another significant inclusion.
Yeah, and he gives us another angle. The book showed his etching Big Al April proof. But what's really telling is his artist statement. It was hand-printed.
Okay. What did it say?
It started with a Picasso quote, actually, about art being a weapon against, brutality and darkness.
Powerful start.
But then it ends with, stop, look, listen, sincerely anonymous.
There it is again, sincerely anonymous, even on his own statement in a book about individual artists.
Exactly. It ties right back into that whole collaborative identity, or maybe deliberately downplaying the individual ego. It's fascinating how consistent that thread is.
Okay, so we've got this picture of 1986. International shows, major local exhibitions, tons of collaboration, community engagement. Now let's dig into his own words, his philosophy. The
Right.
quotes.
Right. This is where we get more of the why behind it all.
Yeah.
He talks about things like sticking to common sense, aiming for a perfectly average view of the universe, which sounds maybe mundane, but for him, it was a way to enjoy miracles on both sides of science and magic.
Science and magic, so not choosing one over the other, trying to hold both.
Yeah, finding a balance, it seems. He didn't see them as opposites, maybe. And his ideas about what art is are pretty powerful, too. He said, art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake.
Wow. So moving art from just aesthetics to something essential, necessary for living almost.
That's how it reads, yeah. Very fundamental. And he really emphasizes the process of making art. Step off the train of thought, he says.
Like get out of your own logical head.
Kind of, yeah. Suggesting creativity isn't just linear thinking. He talks about needing balance, patience, freedom. These feel like key ingredients for him.
And what about that quote on communication? It seemed slightly contrarian.
Oh, yeah. If you argue or if you agree, you may learn, but you do not communicate. Interesting distinction.
It is. Like real communication is something different than just debate or agreement.
And then there's that almost like manifesto bit, resist learning, learn to fail, learn to relax, learn to feel, learn how to really think.
Resist learning. That sounds provocative.
I think he means resist just rote learning, maybe. Resist just accepting things. Instead, embrace failure, feeling, real thinking, a deeper kind of engagement.
More intuitive, maybe. Less purely intellectual.
Possibly. He seemed a bit wary of overanalyzing things, Like too much understanding could kill the magic that art needs. He makes a distinction between knowing and understanding.
Knowing versus understanding. Like a deeper, more embodied sense of something.
That could be it. And he definitely saw the artist in a special role. The only free agent in society, he called them.
A free agent operating outside the usual rules.
Something like that. Which maybe ties into his ideas about art becoming more participatory, less about the artist handing down a finished thing.
Right, more interactive, which links back to the collaboration stuff, too.
It does. And then there's his hologram idea.
Hologram, like
Uh,
hologram.
yeah, WH hologram is, it seems like he was playing on the hologram concept, where every piece contains the whole image to talk about interconnectedness.
Ah, so the more artists contribute, the clearer the whole picture gets, like in his collaborations.
That seems to be the idea. A really neat metaphor for it.
It is. And he also seemed to view time, or maybe the creative process, as cyclical.
Yeah, he wrote a cycle, a beginning and ending the next step and the next. Just this ongoing flow, not necessarily a straight line to a final goal.
More like a journey of discovery that keeps looping back and moving forward.
Exactly. He also had some pretty sharp observations about the art world itself. Consumer art.
Oh, what did he say?
He saw a shift happening away from quiet contemplation towards art that aimed for immediate shock or recognition, like a quicker hit.
Mm-hmm. Less patience required from the viewer, maybe?
Perhaps, and made him wonder about compromise. Does the artist have to compromise in that kind of environment?
That's a timeless question for artists, isn't it?
It really is.
Okay.
But let's not forget his sense of humor in all this. That quote about his time teaching at Rice University.
Oh, yeah, that was great. What was it again?
The first year, I assume? The second year, I capitulated. Third year, I'm teaching.
Huh. Brilliant. Self-deprecating.
Totally. And then comparing the ego to. Oh.
Goldfish is shit.
Yeah. Pretty humbling, earthy image.
Yeah.
It adds this layer of, humanity to all the deep thoughts.
It really does. Keeps it grounded. So, okay, pulling it all together, this 1986 snapshot shows an artist who's firing on all cylinders, exhibiting widely, collaborating constantly, and thinking really deeply about what it all means.
Absolutely. He wasn't just in the Houston scene. He seems like he was a real nexus point, a facilitator. And those quotes, they give us such valuable insight into the mindset driving all that activity.
So the key takeaways from 86 for Camblin. Prolific collaborator, major exhibitions locally and internationally, and this underlying philosophy tying it all together. A central figure, for sure.
And I think what stands out is that the collaboration wasn't just like a fun side project. It seems fundamentally linked to how he saw the world, that hologram idea, everything being connected.
Right. It was philosophical as much as practical. Okay, so here's a thought to leave listeners with. Camblin believed in collaboration. He hinted at art becoming more participatory. So how do we see that playing out today? Are the lines between artist and audience blurring? Is art becoming more of a collective act?
That's a really interesting question. Where is that line now, and is it moving? And hey, if hearing about Camblin and the 80s Houston scene got you curious, definitely dig deeper. Look up the artists he worked with, explore more about that specific time and place.
Yeah, or just find more of Camblin's art online. There's always more to uncover. This deep dive is really just scratching the surface of a fascinating artist and a really dynamic period.